Hello everybody, my name is Katrina Walser, and if we haven't met before, I am a knitting teacher and designer based in Sydney in Australia. And welcome to episode 4 of On My Needles, which is my monthly knitting podcast. On the Needles. Would be helpful if I knew the name of my own podcast. So before we begin, in the spirit of reconciliation, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. So it is now November the 3rd, and so this episode is going to cover all the things that I did in October. And I will not join in on the ever-present chorus of, oh my gosh, it's November, where has the year gone? But yes, the sentiment is there. So, this is going to be a long one. I have lots of little unfinished projects, which we will talk about in a sec. So, grab your knitting and a drink if that's something that you feel like doing, and let's just get to it. So the first section that I have is On the Needles, which is where I go over all of my FOs from the month and my current whips. Okay, so normally my knitting bag is this basket, and it usually stops here and it's currently overflowing. So this is why I was saying we could be here for a while. So to start off with the FOs, there are only 2 or 3. Whoops, I think I lost a project. So, the first thing that I made this month, or at least the first thing I finished, is this beanie. Isn't it beautiful? So this is Entwined by Astrid from Wattle and Wool, and it is a pattern that I actually tech edited for her, but once I finished it, I was like, oh, I really want to make that. And she was looking for test knitters, so I signed up and I made the beanie. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about this one because I am actually making a whole video just on how I made this. It's just a bit of a vlog. And so I figured that I would just go over it quickly, and then whenever it's done, I will post a link to the video in the corner here somewhere. So the reason I wanted to make a whole video about this is that it is my first time working with mohair. So the yarn that I used for this is mohair silk lace from Louie and Lola, who is a designer an indie dyer from Tasmania. If you aren't from Australia, Tasmania is the little island at the bottom of Australia that's like separate from the mainland. And that was the mohair, and it was in a colour called something like Olive Grove. And the other yarn is 100% merino in just a 4-ply or fingering weight, and that was from By Corolla Down Under, and it's just plain like a creamy colour. She uses natural dyes, so I think she used juniper berries to do the dyeing. I do have the yarn right here. Cool. So these are the 2 yarns. Like I said, this one's just plain, and then all of the colour and the variation is coming from this mohair. And so it's really nice being able to support Aussie indie dyers. And yeah, I really like the beanie. I should put it on for you all, I guess. So Astrid really likes making very long brims because she likes being able to fold beanies up, so she puts that into all of her designs. And so this is what it looks like on, which is so cute. I really love it. So that is the beanie. This cabling pattern is just really cool. And then the different textures just make it really interesting. I am not a big fitted beanie person, so I don't know if I'm always going to wear it like this. One of the nice things about the brim being long is that I can leave it unfolded and wear it as a slouchy beanie. My only problem with this is that you lose a lot of the really nice cabling detail, I think. I've never actually looked at it from the back. So maybe you can see it. I guess I will find out in about an hour when I go and look at this footage. But at least from the front, it just looks like plain ribbing. So that's the only downside to wearing it as a slouchy beanie, I think. But we will see either way. I guess it just depends on what I feel like on the day. So I used a 4.5mm needle for this, which made for pretty nice, like squishy, loose-ish fabric. 4.5mm seems like a pretty big needle size for 4-ply yarn, but because of the texture pattern and the cabling, I think it sort of makes up for it a little bit. You sort of need to use a bigger needle for twisted stitches, just because otherwise it gets too dense. And I didn't quite make gauge. I think my gauge was there were too many stitches in the horizontal and too few in the vertical, but I figured that would be fine because it's a beanie, so once it stretches this way, it would like stretch out and sort of be the right gauge. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I think that's about right. Yeah, so that is my entwine beanie. I think Astrid said it's coming out on November 20th, but I will confirm with her. If you do want to get it, and I recommend you do because it's beautiful, I think she's making it free. She tends to make all of her knitting patterns free, beanie patterns free. So if you want this, definitely go follow her. She is Waddle and Wool on Instagram, and I will put a link to her Instagram and just anything else I mentioned down in the description box below. And the beanie took me about a week. I think it normally would have taken me a little less time, but I was filming it as I went for the video that I was talking about, so it took me about a week. So the other two FOs that I have are a pair of dishcloths. I think this is the right side, so yeah. These are my two dishcloths. They are made from 10-ply cotton, which is worsted weight for my American friends, and it's the 10-ply cotton from Bendigo Woolen Mills. So, I have never made dishcloths before. I know they're a very common beginner knitter thing to do because they're small and just rectangles. So they're a good project to start and experiment with. But I've always been a little bit skeptical about how you get them clean, because having thick hand-knit cotton is something that you get wet and soapy all the time. Seems to me like it would be really hard to dry it properly. But I've had many people swear by them, and a lot of people told me, I have a knitting group that I'm on Facebook, and I asked in there, and a lot of people said you can boil them to sort of disinfect them, so I might give that a shot. But the main reason that I made these is that I was prototyping for a design that I have. So I made a baby blanket called the 4-way stop blanket a really long time ago, maybe in 2017 or so. And I was never quite happy with it because the border didn't sit flat on the blanket. So essentially the way you make it is you do a provisional cast on across the middle and you knit up this way, and you do this line here as a set of decreases. And then when you're done, you flip it over and pick up the provisional cast on and knit exactly the same thing up the other way. And so the border is seed stitch here, and you do the seed stitch, you do the decrease, and then you do the stockinette, and then you do the same thing on the other side. And I think something about the gauge of the seed stitch and the fact that it's on an angle versus the gauge of the stockinette stitch made it so that the border never really sat flat. So I wanted to do a pretty decent prototype of a rewrite. So like I've mentioned before, I am undergoing a project to try and rewrite quite a few of my designs, at least my self-published designs, into Australian yarn. So people don't have to substitute if you don't feel like it. So Bendigo Wool and Mills are really cool in that they have what's called an indie designer program. And so you can write into them with a proposal for a design, and they will send you yarn and then host your pattern on their website and sell it through there, and then they give you all the proceeds. So I have one pattern already hosted on their site, and then they accepted my submission for this one as well. So I am rewriting the pattern into using their cotton, and then I also thought it would be a good opportunity to revisit the pattern and see if I could get the border to sit flat. So these two dishcloths, between the two of them, I think it took me about 2 weeks to make them. And the reason it took so long is because I was iterating a lot on trying to get the border to sit flat. And eventually what I landed on is that at the beginning of every row, you do a short row. So you knit along here, you turn back the other way just to add an extra row to the border, and then you knit all the way across. And then coming back the other way, you do the same thing. So for every row of stockinette, there's actually 2 rows of seed stitch, if that makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, don't worry. It will all be in the pattern. And I was experimenting with like what sort of turn I wanted to do, if I wanted to do wrap-in turns or whatever. So I ended up landing on German short rows because they seem to be the neatest. So the pattern is actually, the reason it's called the 4-way stop blanket is because there are 4 colors in it. And I just made this one 2-toned because I was just experimenting with the shaping and I didn't want to have to bother with the color change in the middle. I am really glad that I ended up testing this one out as well, because these were going to be the colors that I used for the final like sample that I was going to take photos of and everything. And my original sample, or like the pattern, was originally written for the cotton from We Are Knitters, and they had 2 yellow tones in their like color selection at the time. And so the original pattern was like a dark yellow, a light yellow, and then a grey and a white in this like gradient. I'll throw a photo up on the screen so you can see what I'm talking about. But BWM only had 1 yellow when I was talking to them about yarn support. So they sent me this yellow and then this grey. So I can't remember the colour names, but I do remember that this white here is called Snow and the creamy colour up here is called Parchment. And I thought that they would look more distinct, but they really don't. Like, I bet if you've been watching this, you didn't even notice that there were 2 separate colours. So I was wondering what to do about it, and then BWM sent me their shade card for 2022. So one of the nice things about Bendigo Wool and Mills is that they send you shade cards. I'll show you what I mean actually. I'll go grab it. 1 sec. So because they mostly, or I think only sell online, they send out these cards that have samples of all their yarn and the colours that you can buy. And so they sent me the 2022 one for the cotton, and I noticed that they had added this dark yellow in here. So I decided that I would grab a ball of that and sub it out for one of the white or the cream colours. Probably I'll get rid of the white colour because it's just a bit too white. The cream is a bit nicer. And so I'm going to go from there. So I'm happy with the shaping now, but I need to wait for the extra ball of yarn to cast on for the actual blanket. So that's why there is no 4-way stop blanket in my whips right now. So Bendigo Wool and Mills, because they've been so popular since lockdown was on, because everyone's home and knitting, they, like, a lot of their colours are in back order. So they said that the darker yellow will be in stock in the next week or 2, so hopefully they can send that out soon, but I just need to wait until that comes before I can start the actual blanket. So those are all my FOs, and now let's get on to the whips, and there are a lot. for lots of reasons that I will tell you about. So I usually try to only keep 2 whips max at any given time, and that has not worked out well for me this month because I have so many things that I just have to pause for various reasons. So last month, if you saw last episode, I actually ended up with nothing on my needles for various reasons that I went into last month. And I was totally cool with that. But then about 2 days after I filmed, I found myself really antsy because I just didn't have anything to knit. And I was watching my husband play video games, which sounds weird, but I will explain more about that later. And I just wanted something to do with my hands while I was watching. So I went ahead and just sort of YOLO cast on a baby blanket. So I've had this yarn in my stash for a really long time. It's called Sus Yarn Twisted. So that's the label there. From what I understand, this yarn is now discontinued. I don't know if the company is still making yarn, but the yarn itself is discontinued. And I picked it up at a yarn swap that my friends and I did. We just brought a whole bunch of yarn that we didn't want from our stashes anymore, and we popped it all on a table, and then everyone was allowed to grab whatever they wanted. And at the time I was really into making baby blankets, and I knew that cotton was good for them, but I honestly didn't know a whole lot about fibers and weights and different kinds of, properties of yarn. So I picked up 3 skeins of this, thinking it would be enough to make a baby blanket. And I didn't realize that it's slub yarn. So it's very thin. I don't know if this is going to show up, but it's very thin and very thick in different areas. And when I looked it up on Ravelry later, I was really confused because it's classified as a bulky, which is 12 ply. And so I was like, well, I guess if you look at the really fat parts, it could be about 12 ply. And so I was sort of bored and I just wanted to cast something on that was quite mindless. So I decided to make a baby blanket. And I thought what I would do was hold the pink together with some other yarn. And what I'd heard is that to combat how slub yarn is, so it's not just so thin and thick all the way through the material, I'd heard that if you hold it double together with a normal or like regular strand of yarn, it will even it out a little bit. So I decided to do that, and I decided to hold it double with some more of the BWM cotton in the grey colour. So it's called not parchment. I don't remember what the grey colour is called. If I figure it out, I'll put it up on the screen. And so I decided to hold it double, and it's come up looking like this, which is pretty cool. I wasn't sure about it at first, but it's grown on me, so I quite like it. So I decided to be weird and experimental, and so what I actually did with this was I did a crochet magic ring right in the center. Because I didn't want to just cast on a little circle and then have to sew it up at the end. And I thought it might be interesting to try it and see what would happen if you did a magic ring and then just pulled up knitting stitches through where you would normally pull up the crochet loops. So I gave that a shot. If you don't crochet, don't worry about it. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about how to do it because I don't really love how it turned out. It's a little bit bulky right there in the middle. So if I was going to do this again, I would probably do something like a toe-up sock cast on. So what's it called? Judy's Magic Cast On, which is how I've done it before in center out baby blankets. I had just forgotten that that's how I normally do it. So I did that, figured it was worth an experiment. And then it's just a very plain stockinette center out blanket. So I think I cast on 8 stitches and then I increased into every stitch. And then from there, I've just been doing 2 knit front and backs in a row at these increase lines just to get the increases going up the spines. So there are 4 spines, so it's going to end up being a square or a rectangle, probably a square. And the reason that I haven't finished this yet is because I had one ball of this grey colour and I hadn't anticipated how much pink yarn there would be, which I'll explain why in a sec. So I had one ball of this grey and the other ball needs to be saved for the actual 4-way stop blanket that I'm going to be making. And I don't think that blanket is going to take up the whole ball. So I'm going to make that first and then use whatever leftovers I have to finish this blanket. So the one catch with all of this is that I picked up 3 skeins of this because the yardage, I just thought at the time that 3 skeins of cotton yarn would be enough to make a baby blanket. But when I went to wind this into a ball, it's really weird. So it turns out the reason they classify this as bulky is because it's already held double in the hank. So that thing that I was saying, oh, the label's still on this. I'm going to use it anyway, so I'll just take it off. So the thing that I was saying about slub yarn being better if you hold it together with something, I think the yarn manufacturer of this yarn knew that. And so it's actually already doubled up in the hank. So when you cut off the ties and you pull the ends off, each strand inside this big loop is actually 2 strands held together. So I think you're meant to knit with it held together with itself. But so because of that, the yardage on the label is actually sort of half of the actual yarn that's in the hank. Because if you pull the strands out individually, then you get double the yardage. So I have way more of this cotton than I thought I would. And for one, unwinding this into 2 separate balls from the doubled up skein was not fun. And I'm not going to describe how I did it because it's not advisable. If you have to do it very, very carefully. And if you take one step wrong, you're going to end up with a giant knot of yarn. I actually at one point had 2 separate, because I have a spare ball winder, I had 2 separate ball winders. I put one end of each of the strands onto each ball winder and I tried winding them in parallel and that worked for about 2 minutes and then it just didn't. So anyway, that's part of why I ran out of the grey colour, is because I hadn't expected to have this much of the pink. So I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to do next. I definitely want to finish this ball with this grey colour held together. So I'll use up that much. But then beyond that, I don't really know what I want to do because I think that it'll get too big if I keep holding it double with the 10-ply cotton, because I still have this entire thing and, 2 of them essentially, because I'm going to unravel it into 2 separate balls. So I could either just end up with a giant baby blanket, which I think totally would be fine, to be honest. I get a little frustrated because a lot of my baby blankets end up being quite small. So I could just end up with a really big one. And maybe I'll hold it together with a different colour at the edge, so there's a bit of a border. Or the other option I was thinking is that I would not bother unwinding this and I would keep it held double and then hold it together with a strand of 4-ply, because I think that would end up being about the same weight. But I worry then that I'll have a border that again won't sit flat against the baby blanket, because then I'd have to swatch it and gauge it and I just can't be bothered. So I think I'm just going to hold it together with one strand of a different colour of the 10-ply cotton and then just have a really big baby blanket. So I will hopefully be able to work on that some more. But I can't work on this until I finish the 4-way stop blanket, because I don't know how much of the grey I'm going to have left over, and I can't start the 4-way stop blanket until the yellow yarn comes from BWM. So there's a whole dependency tree of whips that I have. Everything is stopping each other from having progress being made on it. So when I had to put that down, when I realized I had to wait, the next thing I tried to pick up was a Christmas stocking. So I have had my eye on a pattern called triangle and reindeer stockings. It's called that because the pattern is actually for two separate stockings, but I'm making the triangle one. It's by Jenny Williams, and it is a Knit Picks pattern, but it's not sold on the Knit Picks site anymore, but you can still get it on Ravelry. And I just really like them because they're really cool and modern looking, at least the triangle one is. And I hope you all are proud of me because I have opted into doing colour work. I just if you've seen my video about doing colour work for the first time, I am not a very big colour work knitter, but these stockings were so pretty and I just wanted to try it. So I have had on my list of things to do for literally the last 3 years to make Christmas stockings for my daughter and my niece. I wanted to do it for their first Christmas. This is now going to be their third Christmas and they still have no stockings. And there is another niece now. So I have 3 Christmas stockings to do before Christmas. And I just decided to finally go ahead and do it. So my sister wanted 1 in shades of red and 1 in shades of green for each of her daughters. And then for my daughter, I'm going to do one that's just like red and green. So I sat down one night with the BWM color card and I just sat there and stared for a really long time trying to decide on which different colors I wanted to use, because there's I think 7 different colors in the stockings, and so I'm really indecisive when it comes to choosing colors, and so it took me a really long time to decide, but I finally decided. And then I realized that I was using the 2020 shade card. So when I went on the site, it turned out that they don't even sell some of those colors anymore. But I finally got it all sorted. And I got my order from BWM, and it is a giant bag of wool. This is my bag. I only need to make 3 Christmas stockings. So I don't know what happened. I think I miscalculated my yardage. And so each of these balls, if you haven't seen a Bendigo Wool & Mills ball before, they are 200 grams rather than the standard 100 grams. And on top of that, it turns out that you only need about 10 grams per color per stripe. So you knit it in pairs of triangles. So like this is one colorwork set, and then this is the next one, and this is the next one. And so each of these like stripes, it only takes 10 grams per color, or like a little less than 10 grams even. Somewhere between about 6 and 10 grams. I've been trying to measure it as I go. So I think by the end of this, I'm just going to have a giant bag of Christmas yarn. That's just going to have to be my Christmas stash that I dive into every year to make Christmas things with. But this is going along nicely. So this is for my younger niece. She's going to get the green one. And the color work is going fine. This is like one of the simplest color work patterns you can do, really. They're just triangles. I am a little frustrated because I'm a bit worried that you can see where I've caught my floats. And now that I'm looking at it now, I think maybe it's settled a little bit so it's not as obvious. But especially in this cream color here, I worry that you can see some of the dark green poking through, but I don't think it's a big deal. It's meant to be green, so I think that'll be fine. So I was finding it really frustrating though, using the giant balls with my color work. So I was winding little bobbins off, like small amounts of the BWM yarn off of the ball. But I think I still overestimated how much I needed for each stripe. So I've ended up with all these tiny balls that won't be enough to do the next stripe. So I might stop doing that because it feels a bit wasteful. I mean, I don't know what I'm going to do with all these scraps. So I'm going to finish this one for my niece and then do the red one for my other niece. And then I think if I have as much yarn left over as I think I do, as I think I will, I might make my daughters double the size. Well, not double, but I think what I'll do is I'll hold the yarn together. Like I'll hold 2 strands together because I should have enough yarn for it. And I will just end up with a bigger stocking for my daughter. So we'll see how that goes. I should show you my floats because apparently this is a thing that colourwork knitters like doing. Anyway, look, floats. They are quite neat. I like them. I've been catching my strands every sort of somewhere between 3 and 5 stitches because I am worried that my tension will be too tight otherwise, and I figured that catching the floats will at least mean that I have to stop and think about trying to be a little looser in different parts. So the reason this hasn't progressed is that out of all of those colours that I needed to get, when I put the order in, 3 of the colours were still on back order. So the next colour that I need for this green stocking is coming in the mail. Luckily it was the first of the back order colours that shipped to me. So apparently it will be here sometime next week, so I can keep going with this stocking. I don't know when I'm going to be able to start the red one because one of the red colours is still in back order as well, but we'll see how that goes. And yeah, so I'm pretty excited actually. It looks really cool. And luckily the stocking shaping is really easy. It's just an afterthought heel. So if you can see this line of dark green running through here, you actually cut into that. That's just scrap yarn. You cut into that and you add the heel at the end, and then it's a provisional cast on at the start, so you pick up at the end and make the toe. And yeah, so that's my Christmas stocking. That is also on hold. Oh, and isn't this bag really cute? It's not a project bag, it's just a random bag that my sister gave me for Christmas last year. And it's really sweet. It seems sort of appropriate that I'm making her daughter's stockings in the bag. Okay, so after all of that, I got sick of the fact that I had to keep stopping on these projects. So I cast on a project that I know that I have the yarn for. So the Mad About You challenge is a make-along that's being run by my friend Madeline from the Mad About You podcast. And if you haven't seen Maddie's podcast before, you should definitely go check it out because she's another Aussie knitter who has a great podcast. And she started the Mad About You challenge because she's had a make on her list for a really long time. She's been wanting to make Sizzle Pop, which is a scarf or a shawl that's all brioche, and I think she's tried to start it a couple of different times and it's never worked out. And so she started the Mad About You challenge to force herself to do it because she wanted to finally give it a shot. And the challenge is to make something that you find difficult or that you've never done before. So if you want to join in, I think there are prizes and things. It's running until the end of November. You just have to hashtag your posts on Instagram with Mad About You challenge, and then you can enter into the challenge. But once she mentioned this, I was like, hey, I've been wanting to make Sizzle Pop for a really long time too. So Sizzle Pop is by Leslie Ann Robinson, and I just never got around to doing it. I have done brioche before, but it is definitely a challenge because it's 2 color brioche knit flat, which I personally find to be the most complicated brioche to do. And it has a very distinct pattern, so it's got all these increases and decreases in it. So I gave it a shot, and this is the beginning of my Sizzle Pop shawl. So one of the wonderful things about 2 color brioche is that it looks very different from either side. So this is what it looks like from this side, and this is what it looks like from the other side, and it's coming out beautifully. So the yarn is from Fortune Yarn Co. It's 4-ply tweed, and this one is also from By Corolla Down Under, and I can't remember what the colour was. There's something to do with iron in it. And so this is called Watermelon Tourmaline. So it has pink and green in it. And when I first bought this, I thought it was going to be more of a grey, but when it came in the mail, it's a little bit more green than I anticipated. But that actually worked out well because I think the greens in this are bringing out the green tones in here, and it's looking really nice. I don't love that this is tweed, but it was the only yarn she had in stock that was in this colour. She didn't have it just in a regular sock yarn base. So, I don't know. It's not awful. There's nothing wrong with it. You can barely even see the little tweedy bits in the actual knitting. But it was really weird when I wound the skein up, all the little tweedy bits started falling off, so there were little just like scraps of yarn sort of sitting around my winder and stuff. So it's not my favourite, but it's also not a problem, really. And so yeah, it's just coming up beautifully. So I'm knitting this on, do I know? Oh, I don't even know what size needles these are because it doesn't say on it. I think it's a 4, maybe a 4. And it's whatever it said in the pattern. I think I went up a size from what it said in the pattern because I was worried I was going to be too tight and have the final result being a bit too tight. I think maybe it's a little loose. I wonder if I should have just stuck to what it said in the pattern, but it's just a shawl. I didn't want to bother swatching. So I have not been so frustrated with a pattern in a really long time, and it's totally not the pattern's fault. It's just because it's something new. I haven't done brioche in ages, let alone 2-color brioche with a bunch of decreases and stuff. And the way you increase and decrease in brioche is very, very different to anything that I'm used to. Plus the symbols that you use on brioche charts are also quite different. So I started casting on. I was getting really frustrated because it was just like new and different. And then I went to start using the chart, and even the chart, I was like, what is this? I cannot read this. So I persisted, and it's okay. Definitely missed an increase somewhere along the way, but I just threw an extra one in because it was just on the edge, so it wasn't wrecking the pattern yet. And then I was on a Zoom chat. I have a weekly Zoom chat with some of my podcast knitting friends, which is really lovely. And Maddie is on that. And she convinced me to throw a lifeline in at the end of every chart repeat. So I'm going to start doing that. That's what this string is here. And if you've never used a lifeline before, it's just a way of threading yarn through your stitches. You don't knit with it, you just thread it through the stitches at the end. And it's like loose enough, the way you thread through, it's loose enough that you can just like pull it straight out. But it's there so that if you make a mistake, it's easy to stick your needle through the stitches that the lifeline's running through and then just like frog back to that point. So yeah, that's my Sizzle Pop. It's the one project that I can actually knit on right now. So that's what I'm doing. And wow, that was a lot of information about all of my whips and FOs. I didn't realize that I've been talking for 40 minutes. So there we go. I hope that you are looking for lots of detail about random knitting projects. So hopefully I'll be able to actually make some progress on some of these and have some of them to show you as an FO next episode. Alright, so the next section that I have is called Off the Needles, and it's where I talk about other things that may or may not be knitting related. So I have 2 things for you today. The first is my most recent pattern that I released. It is called I can never pronounce this word. Tetrominos. And it is this scarf right here. So I designed this for KnitPicks. It is a free pattern, so you can download it from their website, and I will post a link to it down below. And it was originally going to be a jumper. That was what I thought initially. I wanted to put this design into the sort of the bottom edge and the bottom cuffs of a jumper. But they asked me if I would do it as a scarf instead. And so I was totally fine to do that. And so here it is. It took me a really long time to figure out how to knit this scarf. It went through a surprising number of iterations. The main problem was figuring out how to get the colours in this yarn to stack correctly. The scarf is written for chroma worsted weight, which is a colour from Knit Picks, well, a yarn from Knit Picks, and it's actually written very specifically to work with how the colours change in this yarn. And the problem was basically figuring out how long it needed to be to make sure that the colours stacked nicely in this sort of gradient. Because if you can imagine, for example, if it was too long, which I did accidentally do at one point as part of the design process, I had in one row, it was like the blue and the purple. So then on the next row, it was the pink and the orangey, like the pink and the orange in that row. So instead of being a nice sort of gradient of blue to purple to pink to orange, I had like blue and pink on one end and purple and orange on the other end stacked on top of each other. So it took a lot of experimenting, figuring out how long to make the scarf. And because of that, what I ended up having to do was make 2 separate panels that were the width that I needed, and then seam them together into a loop. So you seam each side together to make one big loop. And that's how you get the full length of the scarf. And actually, if you've been a subscriber for a while, you'll know what this looks like. You'll have seen this before. So because I had to seam the edges together, I decided to use that as the tutorial video for how to crochet your seams. So I've actually had video of this scarf on my channel basically from the beginning. I just never said what it was because I wasn't allowed to tell people yet. So the nice side effect of this, like it is a bit weird that you make a scarf in pieces, but the nice side effect is that I got 2 sizes into the pattern. So one size, you make 2 panels and you seam them together to make a big loop, and the other size, you just make 1 panel and you seam the ends together to make a smaller loop, and you get more of a traditional cowl. And the thing I really like about this pattern is that because the colour work only goes up halfway, it is really flexible, because if you wear it with the darker side up, then it's just like a little subtle pop of colour, which is what I'm doing now. But if you wear it the other way around with this side up, it's quite bright and colourful, and I really like it. And so, yeah, I've just always loved Tetris. You have very fond memories of playing it with my sister. We had a knockoff version that shipped to our computer as opposed to the proper Nintendo version that most of my friends played. And in our version, I don't know if this is normal, but in our version you could play 2-player. So we used to have like 2-player Tetris battles and bet our chores on them. So if you lost, you had to do the other person's chores. And I don't know if she would remember this, but I always hated doing the washing, like the clothes washing, and she always hated doing the dishwashing. So we would bet those things. And so, yeah. So that's Tetronymous. And I actually have a ball of this left over because usually when I design, I ask for a little bit more yarn than I think that I'll need, because I'm usually designing on a bit of a deadline, and if I ran out of yarn and had to get new yarn shipped to me, especially from the overseas yarn companies, it would be a bit of a disaster because I'd have to wait and I'd probably miss my deadline. So they're usually pretty flexible in sending you sending you as much as you ask for. So they sent me 2 balls of the grey and 2 balls of this coloured yarn, and I definitely used all of the grey, but I only used, that's what I've got left over from a whole 100-gram ball. So the scarf, really, you could use any colour you wanted in here. It would look nice with any really sort of gradient colour. But if you want it to look really like this, then you have to use this yarn because I specifically wrote it for it. But the grey is very easy to sub for. And really you could use any colour you wanted. You could probably use, it would look really interesting with a white or a cream or something. But I figured I would do this as a giveaway. And if you would like to know how to enter, hang around for an extra 5 or 10 minutes because I'll explain what I would like you to do to enter the giveaway, and it's to do with the next section. So the other thing that I wanted to mention quickly that I've been doing a lot of this month is I've been playing a game called Hades. So as evidenced, I've always been a little bit of a video game fan. I was a software engineer before I went and did knitting full time. So I've definitely always been a little bit of a geek. And I usually like either puzzle games or games with a story. So I would call Tetris a puzzle game, essentially. And in terms of story games, like I used to play a lot of Final Fantasy and stuff like that. And I am going to try and keep this short because I figure that the overlap between people who like video games and people who like knitting is surprisingly small. So I don't want to bore anyone. But, so my husband downloaded a game called Hades a little while ago, and it's a fighting game, and I'm really bad at fighting games because I have very little hand-eye coordination, actually. And so whenever I used to play fighting games with my friends, a lot of my friends were into Super Smash Brothers when I was younger. I was the sort of person who was just a button masher, so I would just like pound on the buttons. And so I didn't think that I would be into Hades. But it turns out it has a really cool story. So at its core, it is a retelling of a lot of different myths from Greek mythology, and the writers sort of put them all together into a continuous story. So the main character is, well, the person you play is a character called Zagreus, and apparently in Greek mythology, he's a bit of a mysterious figure because he pops up here and there in different myths, but he never seems to be the same person. It's just like a name that repeats a couple of different times. But in this game, he is the son of Hades, who is the god of the underworld, and he's essentially trying to break out of the underworld. So that's why it's a fighting game, because you run through trying to fight your way out of different rooms and stuff. And I just thought it was a really interesting sort of modern way of retelling some very old myths. And I've always really loved mythology. I was more into Egyptian mythology when I was younger, but I know a little bit about the Greek and the Roman gods. And they pop up all the way through the game. There's like, I don't want to be too much of a spoilery person, but there's like a little side quest where you can try and get Orpheus and Eurydice back together, which if you know anything about Greek mythology, that's just sort of like, you know, a cute little thing. And there's just lots of little cute little side quests like that. And so it's actually worked out really well because I'm pretty bad at playing the game. So it's taken me a really long time to actually get through the story. But my husband is much better at it. And he's gotten through it, like quite a bit more of the story part of it. It works out well because I can just pick up and play whenever I feel like it, but I'm still getting the story because I just sit and watch him play. And so I finally won last night, or maybe 2 nights ago, which I'm pretty excited about. It's taken me a really long time to beat the last boss, and there is a lot more of the game after you beat the last boss for the first time. It's like, yeah, there's a lot going on. But I'm like happy with where I've gotten up to now. So I think maybe I'll slow down now and just like casually watch him get through more and more of the story and just knit while he's playing. Or I'll just pick it up when I feel like it. But yeah, it's been a really fun non-knitting hobby to do. So that's actually what I wanted the giveaway to be. So unfortunately, I can still only ship to Australia right now. Our postal system with all the COVID and everything is just in a situation where I'm not feeling confident to ship anything overseas at the moment. So this is only open to Australian knitters, but if you do want just the pattern, it is a free download on the KnitPick site, and I will post a link to it down below. But if you'd like to enter to grab this ball of yarn, pop a comment down below and tell me okay, there's a couple of different options. Either tell me your favorite video game, and if you've never played video games before, tell me what your favorite hobby is other than knitting. Because I'd really like to know, because I think that would be really interesting. And if you don't have a hobby other than knitting, if this is your main hobby, then that's totally fine. Tell me why you love knitting. So I will do a random draw next podcast episode. So you have a whole month to enter this giveaway. And yeah, you can win a ball of chroma. Alright, the next section that I have is called From the Community, and this is where I share projects that people have made from my designs. So both of these projects this month are projects that people finished a couple of months ago, but I never got a chance to share them, so I wanted to share them with you all. So the first one is a test knit that one of my testers did for Queen of Spades, which is a summer top pattern that I published earlier in the year. And if you'd like to hear more details about that, I actually talked quite a bit about it in my video last week, so I'll put a link up to that up here. But I wanted to highlight this one because I wrote Queen of Spades to work with either a solid or a tonal yarn, and I didn't think it would look good with a variegated yarn, but one of my testers named Suzanne actually used a very variegated yarn, and it actually looked really good. So this is a picture of it, and I don't actually know what the yarn was called. I will look up details and try and post them on the screen. But if you would like to see more details about the project itself, Suzanne is Ingrid Stoker on Ravelry, and I'll pop a link to her project down below. I couldn't find her on Instagram, so unfortunately she's only on Ravelry, so sorry if that's inaccessible to you. But yeah, so I thought I would show that off because it was a nice sort of surprise to me. And it's always nice when people do surprising things with your patterns. And then on the same sort of theme, the other project I wanted to highlight this month is an Adventurers Out There bag. So Adventurers Out There is a tote bag that I wrote for Knit Crate last year. And it's a summery tote that was written for a cotton and linen blend. So Knit Crate are a subscription box. So they ship out, they make limited run yarn, and then they send you a kit that's the yarn and a pattern that is written for that yarn. So I wrote Adventures Out There, and I had a lot of people knit it. It was quite popular. It's actually the pattern that has the most projects on Ravelry, at least a pattern of mine, like design of mine that has the most projects on Ravelry. And one of the things that I've been delighted by is that people have made the tote in the kit yarn and liked it so much that they've made a second or a third one, which I'm just really, I don't know. It makes me really happy. The fact that people like a design that I made so much that they go back and make it again is really neat. So this Adventure is Out There tote is by Heather. She is California Rose on Ravelry, and it's the second bag that she made, and she made a lot of mods to it to make up for some things that she didn't like about the first one that she made. And I will totally cop to the fact that there were a couple of little niggly things in the pattern that frustrated me as well. The main thing is that lace patterns can be a little bit difficult in the round just because of all the increases and the decreases. It can not line up as nicely as you would want it to. So I tried really hard to make it line up properly, but the pattern does shift a little bit as you go up vertically. All the triangles don't stack exactly on top of each other. They sort of work at a diagonal, and people didn't like that. And so Heather figured out a way to fix it, which I thought was really cool. So she made that mod, and she also used a different yarn because she didn't have any more of the kit yarn, and it's actually a 10-ply yarn. So it was originally written for a 4-ply, and so she's gone and made it in a 10-ply, which means she's got a really nice big bag. And she took really good notes. I always find it really helpful. Even when I'm knitting a pattern and I have some questions about it, whenever I find a Ravelry project that just has a lot of detail in the notes, I'm always really grateful to the person who knit it, because otherwise I would have a lot of questions. And it's always just really helpful seeing the mods that someone's made, just to know if the ideas you have about modifying something will work or not. So I was really impressed at how extensive the notes are on Heather's bag. And she made it for her mum, which I thought was really sweet. So this is Heather's Adventures Out There tote. So the last section is what's next, which is basically what I've got coming up in the next month. So in terms of actual knitting, I've shown you all the things I need to get done, or at least all the things that I would like to get done. The next colour for the stockings is meant to come next week, and then hopefully the yellow colour for the 4-way stop blanket will come, so I can do that and then do the other baby blanket. So anyway, hopefully I'll have some FOs to show you next month. I do also have 2 designs that I have due by the end of this month. So honestly, a lot of this is probably going to be paused because I need to actually make the samples for those. I just received the yarn for one of them today, so I will probably get started on that pretty soon. And I can't show you those until sort of early to mid next year, so I'll show you then. The other big thing that happens every November is the Indie Designer Gift Along, and I've participated in this for the last maybe 2 or 3 years. It's a big event that happens on Ravelry that runs from the end of November to the end of December, and essentially it's a big push to get people to make their Christmas knitting. So I feel like Christmas or holiday knitting is more of a thing in the Northern Hemisphere, because I found when I lived in America that it made a lot more sense to give people knits because it was cold at Christmas. And that's not really a thing here. So I've never really knit a lot for Christmas presents. But the Indie Designer Gift Along is a big make-along where they have lots of prizes and they have lots of games and they have lots of little challenges that you can enter in. And the point of it is to support indie designers. So as a designer, you sign up and you put all of your designs up, and then they encourage people to buy patterns from smaller designers. And part of this is that if you want to participate, you put all of your patterns on sale. Well, not all. At least 20 of your patterns on sale, which for me is like all of them. You put at least 20 patterns on sale for a week at the end of November. And it's a big sale. It's 25% off sale. So I'll be doing that at the end of November, and then hopefully I'll be able to participate in a lot of the actual chatter and the threads and stuff. And they have been really good in the last year to try and figure out how to get more of it off of Ravelry, so people who can't access Ravelry can still participate. So I'll be gearing up for that, and then I'll put out more info about it closer to when it starts. I think it starts on the 23rd of November. So if you want to hear more about that and you want to hear about the sale and stuff, either keep an eye out on my Instagram, I'm at Oliphant Cat on Instagram, or sign up to my newsletter because I will definitely be sending out info about it to my mailing list. And the sign up for that is down below. And then the last little housekeeping bit that I wanted to tell you all is that, I thought I'd share a little bit about my knitting business. So I've been doing this as full-time as I can for at least 1.5 years now, and it's been really cool. I've been really lucky in that I can actually try and start this up as a business because my family is financially stable enough that I don't have to have a regular or like a super regular income, which is definitely a privilege. So I've been really lucky that I've gotten to do this full time. So a large part of that has been doing a lot of different experiments to see what I can and can't actually get up and running. And so my YouTube channel has definitely been a big experiment. I just wanted to try it at some point earlier in this year and see how it could go. And it's been going pretty well. It's gone way better than I thought. I honestly thought I would only have like 200 subscribers by the end of the year, or by the end of the first year of my channel. So I'm so grateful to all of you who are here, and I'm so glad that you've all subscribed and stuff and wanted to support me. But some of the other experiments that I'm running have been actually going better than I thought. So I started tech editing, which is where you essentially proofread or edit patterns for other designers. So I started that a couple of months ago, and that's going really well. And I have a couple of designs, like I mentioned, that are due at the end of the month. And so all that being said, those are experiments that are going pretty well that are actually bringing in some income, which is really good. But because of that, I feel like I need to step back a little bit from the YouTube because I need to focus on those a little bit more. So all that being said, I am going to start publishing videos only once every 2 weeks. So if you've only ever watched the podcast, I post one of these episodes at the start of every month, but I post a video every week actually, and the videos on the other weeks, some of them are tutorials, some of them are little vlogs and stuff like that about how I made a particular piece. And so I'm still going to do the podcast at the start of every month, but I'm only going to do one other video a month, at least for the foreseeable future. I'm sorry if anyone really likes the weekly videos. If I can get to 1,000 subs, that's where YouTube starts actually paying you for ads and things. So that's a good milestone for me to try and hit. And I think if I got to 1,000 subscribers, I'd probably put a bit more effort back into my YouTube channel, because then it would make more sense and actually see some return from all the time that it takes to actually make these videos. But I do really love just sitting and chatting with you all once a month. So I will definitely keep the podcast up. And what I do for the rest of the month, we'll see. But the YouTube still has gone way better than I thought it would. So thank you all for being here. And if you are new here and you would like to keep supporting me, the easiest way of doing that is just to subscribe. Honestly, just hit the subscribe button and the like button on this. And if you want to watch older episodes of the podcast, then I'll link the last episode here and a playlist of all of the previous episodes down here. And if you can share it with a friend who might also enjoy this, then hopefully I can start making more videos again. And so that's it for October or November. I will see you all next month.